Hi guys, Lindsay here with Storybrook Family Farm. Today I figured I'd take you along to start some seeds with me. I live in Ohio, so I kind of right in between Zone 6A and Zone 6B, so for the sake of this video, we'll just say I'm in Zone 6. Because it kind of seems to change every year. But anyways, so today we're going to start some brassicas, which is, for those of you that don't know, those are the members of the cabbage family. So particularly today we are going to start some kale and some collard greens, and I'm also going to start some tomatoes and peppers. Those will have to stay inside of the house for right now because it is too cold for them to stay outside permanently. But it's not too cold for anything that's in the cabbage family. So I got some pots already partially started, and I figured I'd show you how I do it because it's very different than anybody else I've ever seen. So I hope you enjoy. Right here we have a old coffee can that has some potting soil in it. It is an organic mix. If you live in an area that has very fertile ground, you can actually just use gardening soil to start seeds. A lot of seeds, they really don't care as to what the soil actually is, because in reality, if you're starting them in your garden soil, they're ultimately going to end up in your garden soil anyways. So it doesn't really make sense to have to really worry about, oh, well, they won't start, but most stuff will start because you can actually directly sow your seeds into the garden for a lot of different crops. So I have a layer of the topsoil, the potting soil, and then I have a small amount of rabbit manure here, and then I have a little bit more topsoil here. So what we're going to do is I'm going to pull out some red Russian and some white Russian kale seeds. So here is the white Russian. I don't know how well that's going to show up. It's very sunny, so I'm kind of filming this blindly right now. And then here is the red Russian. So they are both an heirloom variety. A lot of the seeds that we have are pretty much all heirlooms because we like to save seed, but we do not have any kale that we started from seeds ourselves right now because they take 2 years to go to seed. And for those of you who don't know, we recently, well, it was about a year ago, it was last April, sold our house that we had in town and are currently living in a camper on family land. So when we lived in town, I actually had a small greenhouse that during the move we transitioned into being a chicken coop out of necessity, and it was there. So we transformed that into being a chicken coop for us to use, and so I don't have a greenhouse. So I'm going to show you what to do also if you do not have a greenhouse, but you really, really, really want to have a garden and start some plants. So I sprinkled some of the red Russian into the pot. I did not count because numbers are hard. So here is some of the white Russian. These two, as soon as the seedlings emerge, they are completely different colors and stuff. The white Russian is actually a green color, and the red Russian obviously has some red in it. So it makes it very easy to distinguish them. And with kale, the kale doesn't really care if it's planted next to other varieties of kale. And as this channel goes on and you guys get to see how I garden, you're going to see that it's kind of all just shoved together, and it kind of ends up creating a really dense jungle-like experience that kind of makes your inner child get lost in there, and it makes it a lot more fun. Plus you get to observe the different ways that like the bugs and things like that work together, and it creates a natural habitat for a lot of wildlife. And it's a very natural way to grow food, and it creates a ton of abundance in a very short amount of space. So now that the white Russian and the red Russian are planted in here, you can't see the seeds because they're tiny. I'll grab some out so that way you guys can see just how small they actually are. And I have no idea if these will show up on camera or not, so just bear with me. They are about the size of like maybe, I don't even know. I can't show them. Anyways, well, I tried. But they are about half the size of a peppercorn if you grind your own pepper. So they're pretty small seeds. They are really easy to accidentally lose. They're the size of a mustard seed, basically. And speaking of mustard seeds, if you have an abundance of seeds that you've saved from the previous year, you can actually make mustard with the kale seeds, and it is fantastic. My old neighbor was a big mustard connoisseur, and I was like, here, try this. And she was like, oh my God, that's the best mustard I've ever had. And I was like, this is my first time ever making it. I'm like, I don't even like mustard, but it's pretty good. So you can make pretty much anything out of everything. So, and then instead of, because these seeds are so small, I don't try to push them down because I have really big hands for a female, and the seeds are so tiny that you'd accidentally push them too far. So then what you do is you just grab a small handful of soil, whether it be your garden soil or whatever, and you just sprinkle it on top of the plant, of the seeds. And you just barely want to cover it. They say the general rule of thumb with planting seeds is that however big the seed is, you plant it twice as deep as it is big. And that's, for some seeds, is ridiculous because some seeds are so tiny, they look like a fleck of pepper. That is hard to say. And then there you have it. You just gently cover up all of the seeds, so then that way they're protected. And once we're all done with this, I will water all of this stuff gently off camera because I can't see what I'm doing with the sun in my eyes, so I will have no idea if I'm actually showing you guys this or not. So that one's done. Oh, and before I planted anything, I did drill some holes in the bottom of this coffee can, so that way whenever I water it, the excess water won't just sit in the bottom of the coffee can, causing the seeds in the soil to mold and rot and just get kind of gross. So you definitely want to make sure if you're using some sort of container that is not a gardening container, that you put holes in it. Otherwise, it'll become like a swimming pool and your seeds will never survive. All right, so then this here container is an old Arctic kiwi container. Those are fun to grow. They're a nice little perennial and stuff, and they'll get beautiful flowers, and they're vining, and they're really cool. That would be another topic for another time. But so this container has very large holes in the bottom. So what I do is I don't want all of my soil and everything to go flying out of these holes, especially my seeds and stuff if they were to make it all the way down there. Chances are they won't, but you can use newspaper, or if you have some sort of packing paper or something like that that's not printed on, doesn't have ink or a sheen on it, you can use that. So I just cut it down, folded it up so that way it's like 4 times as thick, stuff it in the bottom, and then I take my hands and grab some soil, and if there's clumps in it, you just want to really break them up into basically a powder and stuff. When a seedling is small, its roots and stuff are not very strong, so they cannot break through any sort of hard clumps in the soil. And it is especially important if you live in an area with clay soil and you are going to use some of your actual garden soil for seed starting. You really, really, really want to make sure that you can aerate it really good and basically just, hold it up like this and use your hands to essentially sift through it, because that's the biggest problem with using garden soil that people don't talk about is the soil, especially if you live in an area like I do with a lot of clay, it will basically just suck together kind of like Play-Doh, and then there's no air left in there, so then the roots can't grow very well and they get stuck. So what helps is, like this mix here, it actually has little like wood chips and things like that in it. So if you add some different organic matter, or if you compost or whatever, you can add that in with your regular garden soil, so then that way there's different things that can help break up the soil and make it so it can't just basically turn into a brick. After all, the original bricks were all made from clay that were locally mined. The clay was locally mined in the area, and then a brick foundry would be there. That's all for good reason. So anyways, you just want to break up the soil, and then when you get about 2/3 of the way up in the pot, that's when you want, if you have any sort of compost, or for us, we raise rabbits, so we have an abundance of rabbit manure, which is fantastic for growing food. So when you get it to being about here or so, you then will add a small layer of rabbit manure, which I hope everybody knows what rabbit manure looks like, because I'm not about to show that on camera, because some people might be squeamish that watch this, like my dear aunt. So You then put a layer that's about as thick as your finger or so in there, and you want to just basically cover the entire level of dirt. And then you add more dirt, continuing to break it up so that way it's nice and fine, so that way the roots can spread abundantly. The key to strong plants is strong roots. So what you can't see underneath the surface is actually more important than what you can see above the surface. So try to keep that in mind if you're going plant shopping this year. The tall, spindly plants like tomato plants and things like that, don't buy them. You want to buy the ones that are short, squatty, and a really fat stem. Those plants are actually stronger and better than the ones that are, 12 inches tall and real thin and all that stuff. Those ones are actually really weak plants. So if you buy the ones that are like that are tall and lanky, like a basketball player, you're going to want to bury half of the stem with them. So then that way they have some strength to hold up to the winds. All right, so in this big pot, we're going to grow 3 different types of kale in it. The first type we're going to do is the lacinato kale. It is also known as dinosaur kale, which is kind of fun. So we'll start some of them. In all the different varieties of kale, in pretty much everything in the brassica family, the cabbage family, the seeds are the same size. They look absolutely identical. And when the seedlings first come up out of the ground, they look the same. So good luck if you spill them, because you will never know which one you spilled. Don't ask me how I know that. All right, so then we're going to sprinkle some of the lacinato kale into this container. And don't worry, I'm not actually going to consume all of this kale. I do farmers markets, so some of this will go to the farmers market, and some of it I have a friend that's asked me to start some kale for them. So I made sure before I started planting that I had other people that wanted a bunch of kale. Granted, we like kale a lot, but we can't eat like hundreds of plants worth. All right, so the next kind we're going to do is the Siberian Improved, which is one of my favorites. I forgot to mention that Tracy's all-time favorite kale is the Red Russian, so I always try to plant extra for her. We like to saute the kale and add it to cheesy eggs and stuff. Sometimes we'll add ham to it, and I call it super cheesy eggs because super makes everything more fun. But anyways, yeah, we like to saute it. We like to eat it raw in salads, but we also really like to use it as a garnish for on top of our salads, kind of like, or not salads, for our sandwiches. So I make artisan bread that I sell locally at the farmer's market, and that having fresh organic kale on that, oh my god, like it creates the best sandwiches. All right, so then here's my last type of kale that I'm growing this year, and it is called the blue Scotch curled kale. It is my all-time favorite. It holds up really, really well when the super cold weather comes and stuff. So does the Red Russian. These two varieties, in our experience, they tend to grow the best. We haven't had any sort of issues with them not producing very well. They seem pretty resistant to like the cabbage worms and things like that. And they taste really good. And plus, it's kind of neat whenever you make a sandwich with super curly kale, because then it kind of looks like it's got like clown hair sticking out of the sandwich and stuff. So it's kind of fun. I like making my food fun. They always say, be an adult, don't play with your food. Well, I am an adult, and playing with my food is half the fun. That's why I like to grow it, because then you get to play with it throughout its entire life cycle. So, there. Now we got some kale started in that pot. And always make sure that you're keeping your seed packets very far away from your watering source, because if you get the packets wet or the seeds wet, then they're not going to be any good for the next year, most likely. So if you accidentally get your seeds wet through starting all this, just go ahead and start the wet ones, because otherwise it's going to be hard to get them to dry, and the chances of them molding is extremely high. Okay, so then you got all the kale seeds in there, which you probably can't see. So then you just repeat the process. That's good and covered. Give it a little pat down for good luck. And then now, I already filled up the collard greens pot. I didn't want to bore you guys watching me fill so many pots. so I pre-did some of this stuff. So I've actually never eaten collards, but a friend of ours had requested that we grow collards this year and stuff to go along with our kale that she purchased. So we figured, okay, we'll try it. Like, we'll try anything. It's actually how I found out that I liked rutabaga. I always wanted to try rutabaga, but in the store, it's like $2.99 a pound, and a packet of seeds was like $2.49. And I was like, wow, I've waited this many years in my life, and I've never tried rutabaga. I think I can wait another season until it's done growing. And if I like it, then I have like 1,000 seeds that I could grow 1,000 rutabagas. So that's what I did. I grew like 100 rutabagas, found out I liked them, which was a huge relief. And we've grown rutabagas ever since. Same thing with turnips. So now the collards are planted. We just repeated the same exact process. All right, now I'm going to show you guys what I call the poor man's greenhouse. So it is warm enough for the collards and the kale and stuff like that to be outside. However, they will start growing better and faster, and they will germinate, which it means pop out of the soil a lot faster if it's even warmer. So one of the things that you can do is you can buy a tote, or if you have one like I do that's actually very dirty, I should have washed it, but yeah, it is what it is. This is real life. So you can take that tote and you can put your plants on the ground, like set your pots on the ground. I would move the camera, but if I move it with this little tripod, it'll fall over and I'll never get it back in the right spot so you guys can see me. So you'll just have to use your imaginations. So you'll put your pots all right up against each other, like so. And then you will take your tote and you will flip it upside down on top of it to almost create like a shelter for it. So that will make it so when the sun is shining its rays, it'll create a miniature greenhouse. So as the season goes on, I will end up starting more seeds and more plants and more pots and stuffing that tote as full as I can with different vegetables and things of that nature. That is what I call the poor man's greenhouse. Because you can buy them totes in various different sizes from Walmart or the dollar store. And I bought a really big one and it was, I think, like 14 something. So I mean, that's pretty cheap for the amount of seeds that you can grow, especially with this method of just scattering them. All right, so now we're going to talk about the ridiculously poor man's greenhouse. That is, you can take an old gallon water jug or a milk jug and create a little greenhouse out of it. What you do is you start your soil the same exact way as you did in the other one. You still put your manure or compost in there in the same length of layers. Then you put the soil back in there, and it doesn't matter what type of seed you are starting, you're still going to set up the pots the exact same way every single time. The reason you don't want to have the manure clear down at the bottom is by the time the plants are big enough to have roots that'll go all the way down to the bottom, it's time for them to get out of there anyways. So they never even got to have any of the nutrients. If you have the manure clear up at the top, well then the seeds aren't going to make very long roots to look for all the nutrients. So if you have them so that way the manure is an inch or so down, then the seeds are going to end up starting their roots out. And then they're going to go, oh man, we're kind of hungry. And then they're going to dive deeper into the earth / soil / pot to find further nutrients. So doing it this way gives the plant the chance to grow like a normal plant, and then they will harness the nutrients and stuff out of the manure, be all super duper happy about it, and then they'll just be able to keep growing. When you grow plants in an itty bitty little pot, like the ones that you see them at the store in those little 4-packs or even the 6-packs, what happens to the roots is the roots get super stuck and knotted together like this and get root bound. So then after you plant the plant, it still thinks it's in a container because its roots are constantly hugging itself. So the plant will, still produce fruit and stuff like that. Some of them might die because of being root bound, but they will not be able to undo the knots that are in them. Think of if you have long hair, when it gets super duper tangled, there ain't nothing you can do about it and stuff. It's a huge pain, literally. So if you have them in a container like this, they will never get root bound. They might get a little bit tangled with each other because you're planting so many in there together, but they won't get root bound. So when it comes time to planting them in the garden, which I'll make a video planting these peppers in the garden and stuff and how to transplant them and whatnot, they all will have their roots out kind of like tentacles and stuff, and just they'll be dangling and ready to go. So then you'll just create a little hole in the garden, set them in there, spread the roots out a little bit, and the roots are automatically ready and supercharged, full of life, full of energy to just go. So that's part of why I like doing it this way. Plus it saves space and it's way easier for if you got big hands or if you don't have good finger dexterity. So now that we got some soil on top of the manure, we're going to plant these chili poblano peppers. We have found in our experience that even though we really like bell peppers, we can't really grow them very well. I don't know if it's something to do with our climate or the variety or what. We've tried a bunch of different varieties, but they stay really small and they just don't do as well as ones that are more of like a poblano shape. So with the peppers, you want to scatter the seeds just like you did the kale. You just spread them around, and if you got a bunch clumped up together, you'll just want to scooch them over so that way they're not fist fighting each other for the nutrients and for the space. And the wind just threw some of my collard green seeds over. So, as you can see, they're just kind of like sprinkles on a cake. So you sprinkle them in, then you sprinkle some soil. And when you're first putting the soil on to cover, you got to remember too that you're going to be watering. So the soil is then going to squish down. So when you go, oh, okay, this is about 1/8 of an inch thick, go ahead and make it so it's 1/4 of an inch thick of soil on top of the seeds, because once you water it, it's going to squish it back down. So then it'll go back down to that 1/8 of an inch. So then those are planted. They're patted down for good luck. Now we have a top for it that is labeled. So you would then stick that top on top of the plant, and then try your best to secure the top on there. I'm going to use Gorilla Tape because I don't really want to play with moving the plastic around a bunch of times when it comes time to watering the plant or any of those sorts of things. I've seen where people will leave part of the plastic still attached on the jug, and that just makes things so much more complicated. I like to do things a no fuss way that I can just quickly do stuff, because I got a really busy life and I don't want to take up a bunch of my time and energy playing with a plastic lid and trying to get it to stick on and go off and all that junk. Just seems like too much work for me. So I just shove some tape on the back side to act essentially as a hinge, so that way when it's time for me to water them, I can easily water them. But then when they're going outside, so that way they get warmed up by the sun, I can just put the lid back on. I also have dogs, and they like to get into everything, so this will help deter them. So the poblanos are planted. Now we are going to do the same exact process for the tomato plants. I'm not going to take you guys along for this one because I'm hoping by now I've explained enough how to get the plants going. I am, however, going to show you how to create your ultra poor man's greenhouse. So you start with a jug. You put a line on it so that way you can cut properly. You take a drill. You put a pilot hole in so that way your scissors are much easier to go through. Especially if your scissors are really sharp, you don't want to accidentally miss and stab yourself. Although I do imagine that the blood would probably be helpful for the plants in the long run, I still don't recommend it. So you take that off, and then you drill some holes in the bottom of this. It's as simple as that. So you'll want to drill about 10 holes just randomly spaced throughout there. A hole here on the side, a hole here on the corner side, on the corner, on the corner. and then it's done. Then you repeat the exact same process as you did for all of the other plants that you've seen me plant. All right, I hope you guys learned something from this. If you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video and would like to support our channel further, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a thumbs up. All right, happy growing, everybody.